Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
The Pittsburgh Steelers made big changes at QB this offseason. Did they have a draft to match? Also, the Suns season hung in the balance, and no one could seem to make sense of what the Falcons are doing. Today's episode brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase.
I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
The Pittsburgh Steelers have big questions to answer heading into the 2024 season. New quarterbacks, plural, in the building. Where can they go from here? Well, it starts with a pretty doggone good draft in 2024. By most accounts, one of the best grades, if you like draft grades, maybe you don't, in this 2024 cycle. Chris Carter joins me now from Locked On Steelers. And Chris, it seems like the Steelers do what they always do. Good players fall to them, and they don't overthink it. They just say, yeah, that's mine now.
Yeah, and what's crazy is this year, like they've done that a lot of years, and certainly the Steelers have had their fair share of misses like anybody else, but this was a year where their needs lined up perfectly with a lot of the values in this draft class and a lot of the values people have in general. A lot of people were wondering, could this team get a center? One of the top plug-and-play centers of this draft class, but also get one of those premier tackles at the top of the first round. And the answer ended up being yes, and they didn't have to trade to do it, which was not something we expected at Locked On Steelers. We all thought, hey, if they're going tackle or corner in the first round, that's great. That's the right position of value, but they're probably going to have to trade up in the second round to go get a Zach Frazier or Jackson Powers-Johnson or Graham Barton. But no, they end up getting both and still get a wide receiver in Roman Wilson that I thought was pretty good going into this draft class, along with other guys like Peyton Wilson, and I think maybe a potential future starting guard in Mason McCormick.
How do you, when you look at this class, who do you think has the most opportunity, not just potential, but opportunity to come in right away and have an impact?
I think Troy Fautanu, I know it's the chalk answer, but he is a pure right tackle. And one thing to know is that like Broderick Jones played right tackle last year, but only because Dan Moore Jr. just can't play right tackle. For whatever reason it is, the Steelers have tried to move him there for years. He hasn't been able to do it. Now that Fautanu's coming in, they're going to move Broderick Jones to the left side and say, Dan, you're going to just have to get used to it or the rookie's taking your spot. And so that to me is the obvious he's going to be there. Zach Frazier will also start because frankly, they just don't have another center. But I think that's the situation though. They wanted to upgrade this offensive line last year. In the last 10 games of the season, they had the second best rushing offense in the NFL, only behind the Ravens. And that was tied to when Broderick Jones became a consistent starter. Now, if Zach Frazier and Troy Fautanu can live up to the hype and grow with Broderick Jones, they could be the three anchors that build the offensive line for the future and make this more of that physical, old school Steelers team, but in the modern era of the NFL.
Yeah, a lot of the names that you've mentioned so far, offensive players, center, right tackle, receiver with Roman Wilson. We know that this Pittsburgh Steelers team can play some defense. They've been doing that for a long time. I think the question that I have here, Chris, is, okay, you're bolstering this offense, but you have two quarterbacks in Justin Fields and Russell Wilson that you don't know if they're going to be here beyond the season. So is this, hey, let's support these guys, see if one of them hits, and then maybe is your long-term starter, and then if they're not, you have the pieces in place? Or do you think that there's something else going on here?
No, that's the exact approach. They know that, like, look, Russell Wilson, if he does great this year and he wants a whole lot of money, he'll probably be back on the free agency market testing how much money he can get. And that they'll be like, okay, but that's why they got Justin
Fields. Kirk Cousins.
Exactly. Just like, if he's and like, look, ain't nobody mad at Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins getting paid. But that's the key economic factor in today's NFL world. You want to get to the free agency market because that's how the biggest players get paid. Even like Kirk Cousins, ain't no one ever said Kirk's the top quarterback, but you get paid like one. Why? Because he's always in the free agency market. I think Russell will take advantage of that. And Justin Fields is a guy who they feel like Mike Tomlin loved Justin Fields in the first draft process. Like when he first coming around, there was a viral clip of him being really excited, but Mike Tomlin also he's like, hey, like I like a lot of guys that wasn't unique to just Justin Fields, but they do like his upside and they also like the way he carries himself. The biggest problem that they had, I think with Kenny Pickett was they were happy to let Kenny Pickett compete with Russell Wilson, but Kenny Pickett he was like, I know this was supposed to be my spot, or if anything, he'd compete with me while I was in pole position at number one. Justin Fields doesn't have that problem. He has a lot to earn. And I think it's very Jordan Love-ish, where, they're going to give him the opportunity to say, hey, do you want to stick around here? We'll sign a 1-year deal. You can prove it next year after Russell's gone. And if not, then they move on and they get the quarterback then. But this way they have 2 cracks at that, while also saying there's a much better offensive line developing. They've got playmakers. They've got a run game. And the defense, as long as no one major gets injured, they should still be a top 10 unit for another year.
Stay up to date on the Pittsburgh Steelers all year by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Steelers on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Sports Today your first listen. Coming up, the Suns are in shambles. Before we get to that, Luka was the problem for the Mavs, not the solution in Game 4. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. Game Time has deals right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. With zone deals, you pick the section, and Game Time picks the seats for big-time savings. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the free app, and new users can get $20 off their first purchase with code Locked On. Terms apply. That's code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price, guaranteed. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Luka Doncic was one of the big reasons the Mavs dropped a game at home to even the series with the Clippers.
Let's start here because it's a loss, and so you kind of always have to steer negative after a loss like that. Luka Doncic, although he had a 29-point, 10-rebound, 10-assist game, just 3 turnovers too, was 1 of 9 from 3, and this series had turned around because of his defense. The biggest thing that changed from game 1 to game 2 was Luka stepped up, said to the rest of his team, I don't want help. I don't want somebody helping me on defense. I want to win my matchup one-on-one. Luka gets 2 fouls early, which helps the Clippers in their early huge run that they went to go up 31. Then he has 5 fouls in this game with how many minutes left? He has 5 fouls with just about 6 minutes left in this game. And I have given Luka so much credit for his defense in these last couple of games. He was a turnstile at the end of this game, over and over, just giving up hardened floaters, and it was just too easy for the Clippers at the end, and the Mavs did their best. They fought all the way back, but they just ran out of gas and ran out of stuff, and I think Luka is kind of at the center of it because he's at the center of it when they're successful.
The New York Knicks won again in Philly and now just need one more win against the Sixers to advance.
But what immediately jumps to mind is how awful the Sixers were in the fourth quarter. And you mean to tell me, when I thought Cam Payne was providing the spark this 76ers team needed in that fourth quarter, when I thought he was giving you that little jolt off the bench with some significant minutes in the fourth quarter, when I thought he was giving you 5 points quickly in the fourth quarter, I thought that's all he was doing. Oh, you know what? This is good. Need a little bit of a spark. Joel Embiid's dragging, played all of the third quarter. Sixers haven't had a break. They need somebody else to step up. Going into that fourth quarter, Cam Payne on the money, gets a little floater, a little runner there, gets a three-pointer. Then all of a sudden things are looking great. Oh, Cam Payne stepping up. That means you're only going to see more from Joel Embiid. You're only going to see more from Tyrese Maxey. And you need just somebody to come out there and start things off right when you have guys like that, your 2 all-stars, that are without question dragging ass to start out that fourth quarter. And then they didn't show up.
And on the diamond, the New York Mets got a walk-off win on Sunday.
Mark Vientos has arrived for the New York Mets. A huge walk-off home run for Vientos, a guy that wasn't even supposed to be on the roster right now, up for a couple of days while Starling Marte was on the bereavement list. And here he was in a big spot against a lefty late, and he delivers. I'll be talking about everything from Vientos coming through in a big way to Adrian Hauser's rough start to Jose Quintana's great start. A ton to discuss on tomorrow's edition of Locked On Mets. But at least they salvaged a victory instead of getting swept. A thrilling ball game that ends with Vientos coming through. Are they going to keep him on the big league roster? Like I said, we'll be talking about all of that tomorrow.
Devin Booker put up 49. KD added 33, but it wasn't enough for the Phoenix Suns to save their season at home on a night when the Stars were absolutely out. And Edwards put in 40 of his own. And our star in Phoenix, Brendan Clean from Locked On Suns, joins us now. And Brendan, this was not the ending to the season that Phoenix wanted. Why were they not able to maximize this group? Or maybe they did.
I would hope they did not maximize this group, but I mean, look, I think you probably start where you started. You know, the stars that this team was supposed to have, there were supposed to be three of them, right? And I think Bradley Beal's night is going to be the lasting imprint of Game 4, specifically fouling out in just over 30 minutes and never really developing an offensive rhythm. I mean, it felt like last year's elimination games against the Denver Nuggets in the second round, where it was Devin Booker and Kevin Durant being superheroes and looking around where else are they going to get production on the offensive end and keep up with their opponent. And after a whole offseason teardown where you were supposed to be solving that problem, it feels like they're just as far from solving it as they were a year ago.
Yeah, and you and I have talked on this show, and you've talked on your show a lot about the way that this Suns team was going to have to win. It was not going to be the way that the Timberwolves can and do win, and that is with defense. They were going to have to outscore teams, but if you look at this one, I mean, there are games where they couldn't even get to 100 points in some of these games.
Yeah.
Why has this not worked the way that we thought it could?
Well, that part is a little more complicated, right? I mean, I think Minnesota's defense showing up in the same way that it did in the regular season has to be counted as a big part of why, right? I mean, it's always a question for a team that kind of takes a leap. Is that going to sustain? Is especially on the defensive end, teams can take a step back in the playoffs when stars step up and guys are playing more minutes and game plans are there, but the Wolves defense held, and it really squelched out a lot of what the Suns were trying to run as far as actual sets and really freeing guys up and getting their role players involved and generating three-pointers for those guys and even just making life smoother and simpler for the stars on this team who, in this game at least, produced. It was just such a difficult time. You saw somebody like Yusuf Nurkic, who was a big part, basically playing point center for this team. He had a terrible series. And so it just felt like unless the shots, the difficult contested superstar shots were going in, which they didn't really in games 1 through 3, they did a little more tonight. It wasn't really any other answer for the Suns. And then even they get that tonight and it's still not enough.
Yeah, I think that's where going into the offseason, this is so complicated because this is already a very expensive team. They don't have a ton of wiggle room to make additions to this team. Where do they go from here, Brendan?
Well, you heard on ESPN over the weekend that the head coach's job is in doubt. Not sure where that will go. He said otherwise pregame heading into Game 4, and Frank Vogel, the lead executive here, James Jones, was not hired by this owner. And that's probably where you have to start because, like you said, the roster is there's not a lot you can do. You know, you're not going to go out of your way to trade any of those star players. Bradley Beal still has a no-trade clause, which he waived to come to Phoenix, but would have to be waived again if if the Suns were even getting offers for him. Outside of that, they're the poster child for this new collective bargaining agreement reality in the NBA, where teams are really feeling the hammer being brought down on them if they spend to the level the Suns have. So they're not able to take more salary in a trade than they send out, and their picks are in locked, and all these different things that we're going to start learning about. And the Suns are going to be front and center as NBA fans get to hear about all these new tricks, and that's not a good place to be. So they're going to have to hope that chemistry and maybe some new minds up top can do the trick, but they're not going to be able to substantially change what this roster looks like at all.
Stay up to date on the Phoenix Suns by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Suns on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, we still can't believe the Atlanta Falcons made the pick they did in the first round. We've all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low. Not sure you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep. You lift your head up and you say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much money off my friends as I possibly can. That's right, the smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go. They let you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone, anytime, with new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. Play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. Make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. Charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets. Guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. You can also combine the prop bets into a same game parlay for an even bigger payout. Right now, the Lakers are one loss away from 1-2-3 Cancun. The Nuggets, 7.5-point favorites in game 5, according to our friends over at FanDuel. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The Falcons were close, or so we thought. Just a quarterback away. But oh, looky here. They signed quarterback Kirk Cousins. Now they just need to add depth and maybe show up a few weak spots on the... Wait, they picked a quarterback in the top 10? I still can't believe it, and neither can Locked On Falcons host Aaron Freeman.
The Michael Penix selection, right? You now had a couple of days to let it marinate. This won't be the last conversation we have about the Michael Penix selection. This is probably is Michael Penix month. May is Michael Penix month, basically, right? And why did they take Michael Penix, right? It basically boils down that basically the 2 years of quarterback purgatory that you could say the Falcons have been in the last 2 years, they were so scared of that they would say never again. And they essentially this offseason over-invested resources, $100 million guaranteed to Kirk Cousins over the next 2 years, $23 million guaranteed in a top 10 pick to Michael Penix over the next 4 years, to make sure that they never go back. And it sounds great in theory, right? But the reality may be a little bit different. But now this decision has put a target on the collective backs of this fan base. More on that later, as well as, more importantly, Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris, because they essentially are declaring we're the smartest guys in the room because we did a thing, taking a quarterback in the top 10 with no intention of him playing for the next 2 years, which has never been done in modern NFL history. That's why on Wednesday I sat here convinced, saying, promise you they're not going to take a quarterback at 8, because literally no one in the history of the sport has done it.
Here's the other thing I don't understand. Why is everyone comparing this to what the Packers did with Jordan Love or with Aaron Rodgers for that matter? Those Packers teams, the 2020 Packers, were coming off the NFC Championship game and a quarterback who was openly wondering how much longer he was going to play. A quarterback whose contract was probably only going to be workable for another 2 seasons or so. And a team that was ready to compete. The Falcons, are they even the best team in their own division? They could have used a top 10 pick on a player to help the guy that they just spent over $100 million in guaranteed money on. That was the way to make that work. Not a top 10 team. This is a team that is just not ready. They're not a quarterback away. They added Kirk Cousins. That will make them better. But the Packers used the 26th overall pick on Jordan Love because they were a championship caliber team. They had the runway to do that. The Falcons don't. And finally, golf fans are witnessing something special right now. In their last 5 events, Scottie Scheffler and Nelly Korda have competed against a combined 1,100 players, 1,127 to be exact. Nelly's faced 618, Scottie 509. Nelly has beat them all. And Scottie has lost to just one player in one event by one shot. Let that sit in your mind for a minute. The confidence that kind of performance has to instill for both golfers is unreal, and so are their golf swings right now. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, are the Wolves the favorites to beat the Nuggets in the West? So at least until tomorrow, stay locked on sports today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
For more episodes of Locked On Sports Today, go to our video on demand. Click on Sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.